All right, so we begin our discussion here with tissues. Any lingering questions from Chapter 3? I know there's probably lots of questions for mitosis and protein synthesis, but we did cover, all the required material in the last lecture. So let me know if you have any last-minute questions or anything. Otherwise, we'll start here. Okay, beautiful. All right, 4 main categories here of tissue. Epithelial, muscle, nervous, and connective, in no particular order, of course. In some textbooks, or some other schools even consider a 5th category, liquid tissue. In this textbook, we consider liquid tissues, which is blood and lymph, to be in this category of connective. So if you've seen that or taken the course before, and you knew of a liquid tissue category, just know that in here we consider it part of connective. But what you'll notice, and this slide is actually great as an introductory slide, epithelium, what you'll notice is it's all cells. Whereas connective is cells living in a background matrix, which is pretty much water and some proteins, with some fibers. So now when you take that to lab, if you're looking at a slide and you're wondering, is this epithelial or connective? Well, ask yourself, am I seeing just cells? Only cells? And that's the giveaway for epithelium. The one big exception to that would be if you're looking at fat. Because fat cells tend to just basically be fat cells with a little bit of matrix in between them. But that's a small exception. But everyone has seen fat in lab, adipose tissue. It kind of speaks for itself, right? Nothing else looks like it. Do you have a question?
Can you say that one more time? You said cells living in a matrix of water and what?
Yeah, and proteins. And fibers. So make it easy. Epithelium, one thing, cells. As far as when you look at it microscopically, right? Cells only. When you look at connective, you're looking at cells living in a matrix with fibers. So 3 things. Cells, matrix, and fibers is connective. Nerve tissue will be very unique because these neurons have a unique shape. And we're really going to cover more of that when we get to the nervous system. Don't let this be a very large portion of your brain right now. Nerves, its own world later on. We're not covering that in any depth right now. So if you see a brain or a spinal cord laying on the table, and we're asking you what kind of tissue, it's just nerve, that's all. Make it that easy, okay? For muscle, there's 3 types of muscle. Skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Where would you find skeletal muscle? On the skeleton. Amen. Right? The spine, the sternum, the ribs, arms and legs, all the bones. Yes?
What did you say about the nervous?
Brain and spinal cord. For nerve. Skeletal muscle found skull, spine, sternum, ribs, arms, and legs. Basically all the skeleton. What about smooth muscle? In the organs, the hollow organs, making the wall of the organs. So I've got listed on that study guide that we'll look at a little bit later. You can find smooth muscle in the wall of the digestive tract, right? You can find smooth muscle in the wall of the reproductive tract, as in the uterus, such like that. The walls of the blood vessels, the walls of the bronchioles, right? Urinary tract for the bladder and the ureters. So all this is listed on that study guide. So if you're asked what type of muscle is found here, and you're looking at some kind of organ or organ system, it's got to be smooth. If you're looking at the skeleton, right, it's got to be skeletal muscle. If you're looking at the heart, what is it? Cardiac. So these are very, very easy, these bottom 2, muscle and nerve. You can learn that in 5-10 minutes, no doubt, right? This is where the work is, specifically here, connective. Epithelium, maybe give that an hour at the most of your time. Connective is where you're going to be spending a lot of time because it's a very diverse group. Okay, so what I can offer you in this chapter are really just some hints, a little bit of guidance, a little push in the right direction. But really, this is the kind of chapter now that's all in your lap. There's only so many ways or so many times I can tell you, simple squamous is found lining the air sacs of the lungs. How many times do I need to say that? Maybe once or twice. It's up to you guys to actually sit down and, commit that to your learning. So this kind of chapter is more so just you. It's not me explaining or teaching you tissues. It's you spending time, enough time, that you've understood all these. We've got about 21 tissues to learn. Okay? So I can give you some hints on how to discern one tissue from the next, but it's really up to you to learn them all, right? I can't force them into your head. So this chapter is very, 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 very transparent. What do you need to know? You need to know where the tissues are found. That's it, and their basic functions. Okay? That'll be tell you right up front. For lab, it's a little bit different. What's the extra responsibility in lab? Not only the function and location, but what it looks like, right? As in a picture or a microscopic image, right? So that's going to be in lab. There are no pictures on this test here in lecture. All right, we'll start with our first tissue, epithelium. Straight up, epithelium, you should know, is a lining. It lines cavities, surfaces of organs, and skin. The skin is going to be the only outside layer. As a matter of fact, anytime there is an entrance or exit to the body, you would expect to find epithelium there, as a rule, right? So you think of all the entrances and exits to the body. There's not that many of them. They're all epithelium, right? Why? Because the function of epithelium is to protect. It's first line of defense. Truthfully, it is. When you study the immune system, the skin is known as first line of defense, nonspecific immunity. Because it offers a nonspecific layer. It blocks out what it can, right? It's not specific on what it blocks out, just whatever it can, depending on the health of your skin. If you've got open cracks, right, is that a very good protection? No. Then it's an opportunistic site for a bacteria to come in. So should you ever pick a scab or pop a pimple, even though we all have, because it's just so much fun. You know, what can we say? We have nothing else to do, and there you go. But what does it do? It gives an entry site for an opportunistic bacteria, which only makes the situation worse, because now we've introduced it into the bloodstream. Notice epithelium does not have a blood supply. It's what's considered avascular. So scratching your skin, no big deal. Still, barrier is still there. But once we go deep enough, right, where we damage the skin, go underneath the epidermis, that's where the blood vessels are in the next layer, which in this case would be the dermis and underneath the epidermis. So the rule here is first line up, first man or woman on the front is epithelium. Underneath epithelium is always connective. So if I take my skin, for example, I'll pull up a piece of my skin. Most of what I'm pulling here, the thickness of the skin is all dermis. It's all connective. Only the very, very top surface, about the width of a penny, is epithelium. But it's about 30 layers of epithelial cells, or dead cells, most of them. But most of it is all connective. Underneath it, the supportive tissue, right? So on the top is epithelium for protection. Underneath is support, connective. Underneath that is what? If I pull this skin off, what's underneath it?
Muscle.
Muscle. So here's the rule. Epithelium, connective, muscle. And then somewhere in there you're going to have nerves coming up, infiltrating, right? But the nerves go all the way through, somewhat into the epithelial layer, but the blood vessels stay in the connective layer. So that's just an overview. I'm going to repeat all this stuff as we go through the chapter, but that gives you a nice perspective of how the tissues are layered. But the four main functions here of epithelium is what? Line, protect, secrete, absorb. That's what you need to know. Line, protect, secrete, absorb. Then some extra information included on this slide would be is that it can have a sensory input, and epithelium makes up glands. So if you're looking at a gland and you're asked what type of tissue it is, it's epithelium, right? So how do we know that? Do glands secrete substances to the outside of the body? Yes, right? So anything to do with secreting, absorbing, or anything at the surface of the body, the environment around, is going to be all epithelium. Okay. All right, so here's the other characteristics we were talking about. It is avascular, which means no blood supply, but is innervated, which means it does have a nerve supply. So if you want to translate this, whoops, oh wow, hold on a second. If you want to translate that statement, go ahead and over here in the side of the slide, go ahead and write no blood supply, yes nerve supply, or something like that in your own language. It has no blood supply, but it does have a nerve supply. And this last word here, this is very, very important, highly regenerative, which means epithelial tissue heals very, very well. So let's put it in a perspective of a question. What would be the prognosis of an epithelial tissue injury? Good or bad? Good, right? That means it's the capability of it healing itself is very, very good because it is regenerative. Whereas cartilage, the prognosis is very poor. And these are the things we'll learn as we go because cartilage doesn't really heal that well. But epithelial tissue does. Cartilage is a type of connective, whereas all epithelium will regenerate quite nicely. So let's say every 7 days you get a new layer of inside epithelial cells in your digestive tract. Every week, right? Now how healthy those cells are depends on how healthy you ate. So if you ate McDonald's for a month, oh my God, who in the world? I know there was that one guy that did it, but that's insane. I can barely eat it once a month. With the exception of the French fries. Sometimes I can squeeze those in more often. Anyway, you get the point, right? Your cells represent the health of what you've eaten in the past. But yeah, you need to have that good lining on the inside because it does protect, and it is required to have that good cellular makeup for absorption. If you have poor cellular makeup or poor water intake, you won't be able to absorb nutrients or even use them properly. So there's a lot that could be said about epithelium in the future when we get to A&P2, especially for the digestive and urinary tract. All right, last thing I'll cover on this slide is that we have microvilli or cilia on the apical surface. What would you say is the apical surface, the top or the bottom? The top. Whereas the basal surface here, obviously, at the bottom, which borders what? What's this down here in the pink? That's our connective. And this, although this is just an illustration, notice the very, very stark difference. When you're looking at epithelium, you see all cells. That's what I was saying before. When you look at connective, and you can't see so much in this picture, it's not a full image. But you can already notice that you're going to not see just cells in connective. The cells are going to be very sparsely located all through the connective tissue, but there's going to be a whole bunch of matrix, which is water and collagen, throughout that tissue. When you're looking at epithelium, what are you seeing? Cells that are arranged in somewhat of an orderly manner, whereas connective is going to look a whole lot more random in most cases. Yeah. So we'll see cells arranged in one layer, which is a simple arrangement, or stacked, which is a stratified arrangement. Coming back to this, our different shapes, squamous, cuboidal, columnar, I've got them on the board if you can see it. The flat cell squamous, the cube-shaped cuboidal, and the column-shaped columnar. Aren't they named pretty appropriately? Which of these, if you can see that on the board, which of these can hold the most water? The columnar cell, so you would expect that to be in the digestive tract and the respiratory tract. Because we need mucus, don't we, in both of those areas. Does that make sense? So a lot of the design in the structure of the cells goes along with the function. What about which cell is the smallest? Which one can fit in the tightest spaces? Squamous cell. So you would expect that to be found lining small places like the inside of the heart, lining the blood vessels, the inside wall of the blood vessels, right? That's pretty small. Yep. And the inside air sacs of the lungs. So when you're talking about small, tight spaces, your best guess is a squamous cell, right? When you're talking about large spaces that require a lot of water to be around, it's columnar. Cuboidal is a very unique set of cells found in glands. So we'll see that coming up. But we take these cells by shape, mix them with the layers, the choice of layers, simple stratified or pseudostratified, and that's how we named the epithelia. So a simple squamous epithelium would be one single line of squamous cells, right? Like we saw in this picture here at the top. Simple squamous. And that should be pretty noticeable, right? Because you're just seeing cells that are lined up. If you take stratified squamous, it'd be stacks of squamous cells. How about simple columnar? It should be a single row of column-shaped cells, right? Pretty orderly, actually. Pseudostratified is tricky. It means falsely stratified. This indicates really more of a simple layer, but every now and then looking stratified, so it's kind of messy. It looks like a simple layer of columnar cells that's been kind of squeezed together, so now it looks a bit stratified at certain areas. So that's why it's called pseudostratified. So we mix all these up and we come up with 7 main epithelial tissues here at the bottom of the slide. We have to know we are responsible for, right now, in lecture and lab, both simple squamous and stratified squamous. What do they look like? What are they there for? You know, where are they located? Everybody got that? So simple squamous would be a very, very small, thin layer, like the inside of the lungs, inside of blood vessels, inside the air sacs of the lungs, I should say. Stratified squamous would be like our outer layer of skin, epidermis. And stratified squamous will be located anywhere there's an exit or entrance to the body. Right? What's the value here of having stacks of cells? More protection. So anytime we enter or exit the body, this is what we want, is more stacks of cells for protection. So the mouth, right, the anus, the vagina would have these type of things, right, entrance or exits to the body. The difference is that stratified squamous epithelium with no keratin on its apical surface would be those entrance and exits. However, the skin itself, the epidermis, would have a keratin on its apical surface, keratin protein spilled out. So you would call it keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So if you don't know these simple terms here on this slide, you can get lost when we start adding words like ciliated or keratinized, that kind of thing. Because then we're just being more specific. All right, everybody good with this? And listen, you know, trust me, I know it gets to be a lot in this last stretch right before your exam. It seems like there's no way you can possibly get all this stuff in. But if you have a strategy, I promise it's possible. As I was telling my last class, you know, make it a point, like today. Hopefully if your test is today, you're out of luck, but hopefully you did this in the past. Make it a point where you say, today I'm going to learn epithelium. Not that today I'm going to learn all of chapter 4. Today I'm going to learn epithelium. Make a small, useful goal, right? Once you learn it, then build on it. Say, then tomorrow I'm going to learn connective. Then the next day I'm going to review both epithelial and connective. So don't start off by trying to sit down and learn all these in one sitting. That's a horrible strategy. Unless you've just taken this before and you're reviewing. You want to build with small goals like that, especially in this kind of material. Okay, so let's get to it. Simple squamous. We're going to fly through these because really everything you need to know is on that handout I've got for you, the quick study handout. But real fast, simple squamous, inner lining of blood vessels and heart, air sacs of lungs. Here's an actual slide of it. You can see it's not exactly how we saw it right here. This is a different cut of it, but it is an orderly lining of cells, is it not? So that's simple squamous. Do you see any fibers transversing this slide? No, so it's not connective. It's not muscle, and it's not nerve. Just by sight, you can see that. So kind of maybe sometimes work backwards. It's not multiple layers, is it? So it's not stratified. It's not all over the place like transitional or pseudostratified. So you're left with a simple arrangement of flat cells. Are they columnar cells? Nope. Right? So sometimes the easiest way is to work backwards by logic. All right, stratified squamous, two main types, keratinized, non-keratinized. Where do we find keratinized?
Skin.
Only in the skin, the outer layer of the skin, the epidermis. Realize, just to get back to our terminology of pulling up the skin again, if I pull up the skin, what I'm really pulling or pinching is all dermis. It's all connective. Only the top surface that we see is epidermis, which is epithelium. So in order, we said the top surface should be epithelium, then connective underneath it, then muscle underneath that, then the nerves are going to come, through that, all that tissue, all through layers. The same thing goes for an intestinal tube. If your finger's on the inside of an intestinal tube, what you're feeling on the inside where the food will be traveling, which is called the lumen, if you want to know that, that first layer is going to be epithelium. In this case, it will be simple columnar. Then underneath the simple columnar, you would have what? Let's go to that picture. Here's our simple columnar. This is where the food will be traveling, right in the middle where it's white. This will be called the lumen. So what surface of the cell is this? The apical surface where the lumen is, right? Which will be touching the food, right? Or the mucus. The basal surface will be at the bottom where it says basement membrane. Then what type of tissue is beneath the basement membrane? Connective. What type of tissue should be underneath that? Muscle, right. And then somewhere in the cross-section of this cut, you'll see nerve fibers coming through. You can't really notice them that much. They're pretty small. But you will be able to see blood vessels on another slide, not this one. Do you see any blood vessels here in the epithelium of the simple columnar? No blood vessels. It's just cells. Just cells. If we were to expand this picture and we got to see more of the connective underneath the basement membrane, you would get to see all the blood vessels that have been cut, maybe some of the nerve fibers and some of the other glands and such that are located. But yeah, we can't see all that in this particular shot. But notice, I keep going back to this, all the valuable stuff is in the connective layer. The epithelial layer is there for what reason? For protection primarily. Also to be the first to absorb, right? So every nutrient that we absorb through this lumen in this white area where the food's passing through, it's got to pass through these cell membranes of the apical surface, right? So the nutrients have to be small enough, right, to diffuse across that cell membrane. Then as they come into the epithelium, this is more of an AMP2 topic, but it's fun. As they get into epithelium, where do they have to go now to get in the bloodstream?
The other side.
They have to continue to diffuse into the connective, right? And now, what's in the connective? The blood vessels. So now they have to diffuse from that tissue through the wall of the blood vessel. What lines the walls of the blood vessels? Simple squamous. So if you look back to the function of simple squamous tissue, it starts with a D, ends with effusion. Diffusion, right? That's the hallmark of simple squamous. It's thin enough that you can diffuse right through it, right? So that's a big story to get those nutrients right in that bloodstream. Then in the bloodstream, how do we get the nutrients around the body? It just circulates, right? Then it goes to another cell, and now it has to diffuse again through the blood vessel wall into that new cell. So that's why we learn so much about transport, because it really is the hallmark of communication throughout the body. So you're taking something simple like this in chapter 4 and now bringing it into chapter 23, I think, is what it is in the digestive system, AMP2. So that's why we notice the people that do the best in AMP2 are the ones that really got it in the whole chapter 3, chapter 4 category, because it really is the standard to understanding the body is these two chapters here. So do your best, it'll help you later. Okay, getting back to the simple layers, or stratified here in this case. This is stratified squamous. Notice all the layers. This is going to be keratinized or non-keratinized, right? It's all for protection either way. The difference is the location. If it's keratinized, it's epidermis. If it's non-keratinized, it's these other regions, right? Okay. So here, all this is what? That's your entire, the thickness of all these stacked cells is all your epithelium, your stratified squamous. Underneath that basement membrane, of course, again, is connective, and in this case, it's dense irregular. If you wanted to jot that down. Dense irregular will be our dermis. That we'll learn in chapter 5. So, any blood vessels here in the epithelium? Nope. Where are the blood vessels? Down there beneath in the connective area. Okay, great. Now we can see the characteristics of the shape of these cells is that they're more rounded, you could say, at the basement membrane. As they go up, they get flatter. It's because as they go up toward the surface, they die. So they lose their cytoplasm. They get flatter. Yep. So these are the new mitotic, brand new fresh cells down here at the bottom. Right. So you'll say, okay, well, if there's no blood supply, how in the world do those cells get their nutrition? Through diffusion, right? The nutrients come from the blood vessels down here and pass their nutrients to the cells up here. So it's quite cool. All right, cuboidal. Not much to say about here, just a simple layer here of cuboidal-shaped cells. In the middle here would be its secretion, either the urine or the glandular secretion. So this is tough to understand in perspective. Think of what you're seeing here in this picture as a snake-like tube. It could be one long tube that's coiled around, right? And we're taking a good transverse slice of it, and we're seeing that same tube being cut in all different, views here. So this could be the same tube or several tubes being cut, but what's passing through it is what's in the middle, in the white. But again, this is not simple squamous, right? Because the cells are not necessarily flat. They're a little more bulgy, so that makes them cuboidal. Okay, for simple columnar, location. GI tract and fallopian tubes, the two main locations. These are also called uterine tubes, by the way, if you see that on the tests. Uterine tubes or fallopian tubes, same thing. What does GI mean? Gastrointestinal, so we would find simple columnar in the stomach and small and large intestines, right? In this case, that epithelial layer, if you want to jot this down, the epithelial layer in the GI tract, which is columnar, can also be called mucosa. Why? Because it has mucus. It secretes mucus, doesn't it? So the epithelial layer in the GI tract is simple columnar, but it's also called the mucosa. If we go underneath that epithelium to the connective layer, that will be called the submucosa. Okay. So the submucosa would be connective, and the mucosa would be epithelium. Perfect. Do you think I might have said that for a reason? Could be. Could make a nice little snippet on a test question. So what is this? I'm kind of setting you up here. Perfect. Amen. Straight A. All right. And this down here is the submucosa, right? Because it's beneath the mucosa, right? Putting it all together. You'd be surprised how many times you can wiggle out of a test question just by knowing a simple term. And I'm telling you that from experience. If you take an impossible exam like the MCAT, you wouldn't believe how many times you can wiggle or weasel yourself out of a difficult question just by knowing sometimes one word. So that's one of the greatest tips or things I can give you, because I sure would not going to go through all that you're going through again. I don't miss those days at all. I still find it very laughable that I'm a teacher. I really do. Because I remember taking the review course for the MCAT, and it was a girl that was in medical school teaching the course, and she's just standing up there just talking for hours. I mean, these review classes were like 4 hours long. I was just shaking my head, you know. I already checked out about 10 minutes after she started talking. It's like, how in the world could one person possibly know that much information, you know? And the only reason why people know that kind of stuff is that when you live in it long enough, and it's your only thing you think about, your vocabulary, what you see and talk and experience every day, you just soak it in. So this right now, it's so painful to your brain possibly right now because you're breaking new ground. You're honestly breaking tough ground in your head, and you're, you know, filling it with a bunch of information. It gets easier. The more you scratch that surface, you know, inside your brain, the more you cultivate it, learn different things, things start to soak in a whole lot easier. So it's my job in AMP1 to kind of irritate you, push you into uncomfortable territory, so that when you get to AMP2, you're a little bruised, right? And you can kind of soak in a little bit and have a little bit of healing. Yep, it's quite a journey. But so some of my test questions, they may not seem fair, or the time may not seem fair. Well, on the soft side of me, I'm like, oh, I'm very sorry about that. But the tougher side of me is like, just deal with it. Because you're about to enter into a field where nothing is predictable, right? You think you're going to get a patient with symptoms that make complete sense? No. So obviously, you know, it is tough. But I kind of have a dual job for you, like any professor, really, not just me. But yeah, we have to squeeze all this kind of stuff in your head, you know, because really, truthfully, as a nurse, you don't need to know tissues, you know, not unless you're in a lab or something. You don't need to know transport or electrons. But what all that's doing is stretching your brain, right? Seeing how well you can take in information and manipulate it and then make something useful out of it. That's what all this is for. So I kind of apologize for all this tissue stuff because it is sort of unnecessary in a large sense, but very necessary to get your brain moving, you know, to stretch it a little bit. All right, so back here to the tissue. This is pseudostratified. Notice how messy it looks. It's not a very simple, clean arrangement. It's not necessarily stacked cells. It's kind of like just squeezed together. So what can I say? It's long, tall cells, so you know it's columnar. It's messy, so it's pseudostratified. That's my best description I can give you. We've got tall cilia, so we know we're in the respiratory tract here. Yeah?
Is that square over there supposed to be, yeah?
A chunk of it, yes.
Okay.
It is. But this is what it really looks like here, with the mucus droplets in here. See, if you've not taken micro yet, you don't have a sense of how this color comes to be. It's not really that color. A person has stained this slide of tissue with some dye, and all the proteins take up the color at a different rate. So the darker colors mean that there are thicker amounts of protein there, soaking in that dye. Anyway, you get to see the cells that are kind of jammed together, long, tall cilia on top. So the full name of this would be pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium. The acronym is PCCE. There's the full name at the bottom.
So for a test question, what would you say about this? What would you ask?
Well, I would ask, first of all, where it's found, right? I would say, what are the long cellular projections on the apical surface? So if you don't know what the apical surface is, that question is meaningless, right? If you don't know what a cellular projection is, that question is meaningless. But these are all terms that we've covered, right? So they kind of build on each other. But mainly the location, since I don't have pictures on my tests in lecture. For lab, I would just simply show you a picture and ask, what is it? Right? Or if you have my lab class, you know, a simple arrow pointing to the epithelium, I might say, where could you find this tissue? Some people might jump and say, pseudostratified columnar. Well, that's not the answer to the question, right? The question was, where is it located? You just named the tissue correctly, but you answered the wrong question. So that would be wrong. So don't do that in lab. And everyone does it every semester.
So where is it?
And I hate to count off for it because you gave me a good answer, but that's not the right answer.
So where
This
it
is found in the respiratory tract. Yep. Okay, the trachea. I was pointing to it right there. All right, moving on. Transitional. Transitional is certainly like everything mixed together. We don't have flat cells. We don't have columnar or cuboidal cells. They're all kind of mixed. You don't really know what's going on. There's no order to it at all. So we just call it transitional. This would be found lining the ureters, the bladder, and part of the urethra. Areas that can change shape due to the volume of fluid in those areas. Transitional, and realize it's the inside. That's what a lot of people miss. We're talking about the inside lining of the bladder, the inside lining of the ureter tubes, right, coming from the kidneys to the bladder, and the inside of mainly the prostatic urethra, the first part of the urethra. As you reach the end of the urethra, where it exits the body, what type of epithelium would that be? Stratified squamous, right? Okay, beautiful. So this was the epithelium here, which is the inside lining. What's underneath it? Connective, beautiful. You got the trend now? Because we're about to get into connective. Underneath this epithelium here, underneath the connective, you would find what kind of muscle? Smooth muscle. So when you're asked, and this is another tip in lab, when you're asked, if you get this chunk of tissue, a picture like this, you're asked what type of tissue lines or is lining here. The lining is the key, right? You're talking about what type? Epithelium is a lining, right? What type of tissue is supporting in this slide? Connective. What type of muscle is found in this slide, if there were in the slide? Smooth. Right. So be sure you're reading the question, and be sure you're looking where the arrow is pointing. If my arrow is pointing down here, underneath the connective where a muscle might be, and I say, okay, name the tissue, and you see all this up here, and you say transitional, but the arrow is pointing to the muscle, isn't it, in the question? Again, you just answered the wrong question. So just be careful on where the arrow is pointing and what the question is asking you. Or, if we don't even ask for the location, we might ask the function. What's the function of the muscle in the bladder? What does it do? What do muscles do? They contract, right? They squeeze things or they move things. Right. What's the function of the epithelium in this picture? Line, protect, secrete, absorb. What's the function of the connective in this picture? Support. Right, and that's where you're going to have the blood vessels and nerves, right? Okay. All right, so the last part of epithelium, its last characteristic is that it makes up glands. So we have two types of glands, endocrine and exocrine. Now our job right now is to learn exocrine. In A&P2, one of the beginning chapters you have, well, they've changed the order now. I think you don't get it until a little bit later. But the endocrine system is all about hormones, right? These are glands that don't have ducts, endocrine glands, whereas exocrine glands do have ducts. It says it all in the prefix of the word. Exo means what?
Outside.
It has the ability to exit the body. Endo means it does not exit the body, right? No one happens to leak out testosterone, hopefully. Hope not. Right? Or estrogen or anything like that, or thyroid hormone, right? Those all stay in the body, don't they? Those are all endocrine hormones, which means they're all hormones that have been produced by glands that don't have pathways that lead to the outside of the body. So everyone knows what a duct is? Like an air conditioning duct, it's a channel for air to pass through. Well, exocrine glands have ducts. Right? So the parotid gland right here. Everybody squeeze their teeth together. You feel that muscle on the side of your cheek? Right on top of that muscle is your parotid gland. It's a salivary gland. The gland's over here, but being a salivary gland, it has a duct or a passageway that empties the saliva into your mouth. Right? So that's what I mean by a duct. It's a channel. So they secrete their products onto the surfaces of the skin or in a cavity. In this case, it would be the oral cavity. What's another kind of gland, like a sweat gland or an oil gland? Do those reach the surface of the skin? Yes, they're all exocrine. Okay. So one unicellular type we have is the goblet cell. It's a big old mucus gland that we'll look at real fast. The other multicellular ones are the ones that we'll see the different shapes of. This is our big old goblet cell. All the mucus droplets here in these secretory vesicles. Where do these secretory vesicles come from? Anybody can answer that? What's the packager, the manager of the cell? The Golgi, right. There you go. Okay, and they're going to find their way out of the cell through what process? Exocytosis, right? Excellent. Don't you miss those good old days? The cell. This was mucus here on the bottom. Unicellular gland that produces mucus, the goblet cell. Why is it called a goblet cell? I guess it looks like a goblet, right? They had some wine-drinking fellows back then. All right, here's some idea of the different shapes of glands. Now, listen, I'm not interested in you guys knowing all these shapes. If this was a histology class, you'd have to know every single shape. But fortunately, this is A&P, right? So I just want you to know a few of them. I'd like you to know the this one right here for salivary glands, compound tubuloalveolar, and sebaceous glands right here. The simple branched alveolar. And that just gives you a good experience of kind of knowing what these words can mean. Compound means multiple channels off that one single channel. Simple means what? One single channel leading to branched sacs. So the alveolar means sacs, or a sac shape, like a clover shape. Whereas tubuloalveolar means what? Some of them are tube-shaped at the bottom, and some of them are more rounded, like a sac. And compound means it has more than one channel compared to the one in letter D. So just notice those two, D and G, as an example. But notice, in the yellow, this is what you really have to notice, obviously. In the yellow is the epithelium, right? Which is, what kind of epithelium?
Stratified squamous.
Seems like stratified squamous, but it's actually simple cuboidal. Cube-shaped cells. Maybe you can't see it, it's kind of small. Simple cuboidal, cube-shaped cells that actually dive into the dermis, in this case, and then come up right back out to the surface. So the epithelium itself is simple cuboidal, but the gland itself is found in where? In the connective tissue. Well, it's kind of confusing. The gland is made of epithelium, but the gland is located in the connective layer. It's kind of pushed down in there, so notice that. But all of its products will be secreted where? Upward toward the surface of the skin. Okay. Okay, so two types of classification here, functionally, merocrine, holocrine. And then we'll move on to connective tissues. Think about this. Do you want to secrete just parts of your product or all of your product at one time? In the case of an oil gland, a sebaceous gland, right, it secretes the whole amount of product at one time. The whole amount means it's a holocrine secretion. If you're doing a controlled amount of exocytosis, a little blip here, a little blip there, of mucus coming out, right? It's controlled, that's called merocrine. So that's the two ways to know those. So anytime you see a sebaceous gland, it is holocrine. Other glands are merocrine in their function. So here's the small droplets of mucus coming out, controlled, or the whole thing explodes and pushes out all the oil in a holocrine secretion. Okay, and that does it for glands. Just a quick trip down that When we get to our skin chapter, we'll learn the difference in the different sweat glands, but otherwise, that's it for glands right there. All right, so we're moving into connective tissue. Any questions about epithelium? We're halfway there, guys, okay? Muscle and nerve is not that much to learn at all. Connective is a big stretch of, we got 10 tissues to learn. But some of them, they're quite easy. Something like blood, very, very easy, right? Bone, very, very easy. Fat, very, very easy. So really, you take those 3 away, now you've only got 7. Right? You can manage 7 tissues, and even some of those 7 are quite easy. So you ready to go down the road? Wait, let's. What do we rather? A nap with some hot chocolate and cookies, or what? Or learn connective tissue? Huh? Or how about this? Let's just get the A and keep moving. Right? There you go. I hear you. I stand up here and talk all this time. Believe me, I know it's hard to number one, it's hard to care about anything I'm saying. I know how it is. Trust me, I was a student for a long time. It's hard to keep focus. It's hard to care. It's hard to, keep pushing yourself to learn this stuff. But still, I have a job to keep talking to you, so I have to just pretend that you're learning, I guess. But really, truly, it's just about exposure. You're exposed to it here in lecture. You're supposed to go home and review these notes, make opinions on those notes yourself, ask questions, write down questions, go see the tutors, talk to your friends about it. That's the whole process. There's no way you can just learn it in class. You're kidding yourself if you think that you're ever just going to get it just from lecture. Most of the things I've ever learned in my life, I never, ever, ever got from a professor. Because they basically either didn't make sense or or they couldn't speak the language, honestly. Like my physics professors never spoke English, it seems. So yeah, I remember all those days of not understanding a word. And plus, they didn't have PowerPoints back then. We had messy chalkboards in college, and they were enormous. My Ole Miss days in college was an auditorium with sometimes close to 200 people. I was way, in the back possibly, and a little chalkboard up here, with a short professor hunching like this, writing on the board. So at least you guys had things like Google and digital stuff, digital notes. All right. Okay, so connective is all about binding and support, right? It does offer some insulation. It still offers somewhat protection because it's a thicker tissue. It has a matrix, right? So what we said about connective before is connective tissue is cells, different kinds of cells, right? We'll have different names now. We're not talking squamous cuboidal columnar. We're talking things like fibroblasts, or chondrocytes, right, or osteocytes. It's a whole different family of cells that we have to learn now, depending on the tissue. So we always have cells living in a matrix. That matrix is going to be mainly water with some proteins and other nutritive factors in there, and fibers. So cells, matrix, and fibers. Those are your 3 for connective tissue. The fibers are going to be collagen, which is a thicker, supportive band of protein, of course, and then elastin, which is a thinner band, which gives you the elasticity, the snapback of your skin, and then another fiber called reticular, which is mainly just in the lymph organs and bone marrow. So three characteristics: cells, matrix, fibers, right? The cells are going to be varied depending on the tissue. We'll put a name to certain tissue fibers, or certain tissue cells, Then we'll have matrix, which is mainly just all water with some proteins in there. And then these fibers, which is collagen, elastin, and reticular. So that's what we're going to see. It is the most abundant tissue all across the body because it's between everything, right? In between all the organs. If it's not epithelial and it's not muscle, it's all connective, basically. So it's a big old range of tissue here. all around the body. It is derived from mesenchyme. So anyone in here that's ever had any experience with, body work, like massage therapy, or even occupational therapy or physical therapy, all these tissues, right? Bone, cartilage, everything in between, all the other filler tissues, all came from the same root embryological tissue called mesenchyme. So that's why in the bodywork world, especially like in chiropractic, we can do things in treatment-wise that make sense. They're not just hoodoo voodoo things. I can press on a trigger point in the pec and make a sore throat go away, right? Or hit a certain trigger point in the neck and help TMJ go away. These kind of things are not just accidental. It's because you're basically tapping into a root system of tissue that's been established ever since the body's been around. It's not like we made it up. We just discovered it, I guess, people in the past. But yeah, it's very interesting. You can do a lot of work just with the body with respect to mesenchyme, because it's all came from the same root tissue, which is this embryonic stem cell tissue. So what I'm saying is, in the early days when you're being formed, this generalized tissue, mesenchyme, gave rise to many, many different types of cells, right? Many, many different types of tissue. Okay, it is usually vascular, which means it has what? Good blood supply. Usually good nerve supply, right? So it has good innervation, good vascularization. The exception on both of these is cartilage. Cartilage is very poorly, like no blood vessels and no nerve supply. So, what is the prognosis of cartilage healing?
Not good.
Not good. Very, very poor, right? So you damage your cartilage, you damage a disc in your spine, you damage a meniscus in your knee, you damage the labrum or the connective tissue, the cartilage in your shoulder. Those kind of things can keep you out for a season or for your whole career, right, if you're in sports. They don't heal very well at all. They do heal, but never to the point where it's back to where you were prior to the injury. Never. It's always, there's always some deficit there. Depending on how much therapy you've had, how much nutrition you're able to offer, you increase the prognosis, but you never can get back to pre-injury status in that case. Cartilage is not good to be injured. So again, we have cells living in a non-living matrix. So here we go. This is embryonic tissue. This is mesenchyme. The very generalized tissue that we all are made of until things start differentiating, right, into other tissues that we have as an adult. So this is where we all come from, tissue-wise. So these mesenchymal cells can give rise to other types of cells in the future. And that's why they do so much, or try to do so much with stem cell research. They try to take a stem cell, a mesenchymal cell, and try to guide it to become a nerve cell, or guide it to become a new muscle cell, right? Because they want to try to heal some diseases like that, or prevent diseases. So here's our different cells. Fibro is going to be your generalized connective tissue cell. Chondro is for cartilage, osteo for bone, hematopoietic for blood, and adipo for fat. So do know all of these cells. So the prefix is important because it tells you the region of the body, right? So chondro is automatically what region? Cartilage. Osteo is automatically what region? Bone. Hematopoietic, automatically something to do with blood, right? Hematopoietic stem cells can become red, white, or platelets. Red cells, white cells, or platelets. Adipo is always fat. So the prefix tells you the region. The suffix, the end of the word, tells you more sort of the function of what it's doing. A blast means something that's forming. So a chondroblast is doing what to cartilage? Forming cartilage, right? A cyte is more of a mature cell maintaining a tissue. So an osteocyte is doing what? Maintaining bone tissue. Whereas an osteoblast would be building bone tissue. An osteoclast, in this case, would be something that actually breaks down bone tissue, but for a reason. It breaks it down to suck the calcium out of it. Because if we're not eating dietary calcium, we call upon these osteoclasts to steal calcium from our bones to put in the bloodstream. Why do we need calcium in the bloodstream? To make our muscles work, like the heart. That'd be kind of important, right? So yeah, the bone, we'll see in the chapter coming up in chapter 6, is just really a bank of calcium that the body uses to steal from, sometimes if we're not eating enough calcium. And of course, as we get older, that turns into a big hormonal problem. It's hormonally driven. So some women and some men, mostly women though, lose their calcium in their bones because of this hormonal disorder controlling the osteoclast. So we'll see more about that later. For right now, just know the cell types and know what these mean. Did everybody get them? A cyte is a maintaining type of cell. A blast is a building cell. And a clast is a destroying cell.
Repeat that,
Yep.
please.
Cytes, anything with a cyte is just a mature cell. A mature cell maintaining the tissue. A blast is a forming or building cell. Building a tissue, you could say. And the clast is a destroying or resorbing, you can put it that way. Resorbing cell. All right, so that sets the stage. Learning the tissues really, the last thing we'll do before we get to them is just learning about the matrix. So remember we said cells, matrix, and fiber? We did the cells just now, now we're doing matrix. The matrix is fluid, which is what? Water, right? Proteins, general proteins, which are always made by these cells, and proteoglycans, which are proteins with sugars attached. The fibers, like we said, collagen, elastin, reticular. The tougher fiber, the collagen, is the one that gives anyone's tissue, or if you want to look at skin as an example, the underneath the connective tissue here, gives you the tone. So the ability to, manipulate the tissue and it holds itself very well, has a tone to it, has a form to it, is due to collagen. If you see someone with their face completely drooped down, where the skin does not tone up itself and hold itself up, they've lost their collagen, right? So what do people get? Injections to pull it up, right, or something like that. The snapback, the stretching, not just the stretching, but it's also the return to the original shape, is the elastin fiber. So a good healthy amount of both of these gives you, the healthy skin that we all want to have. So what's the best way to encourage these fibers sticking around?
Drink water.
Is motion, right? What'd you say?
Drink water.
Drink water, absolutely. Drink water, you're right. That is the number one reason. Bingo, you got it right there. Without water, there's no chance of you maintaining these proteins, right? Because they denature, like we talked about. But to maintain them otherwise physically is through motion. So that's why massage is one of the best things you can do all around the body. Certainly, not that we go around massaging our face, but we should, At least like in the shower. Rub your face like, with some hot water or something. Keep it active. Slap yourself around a little bit. You wouldn't believe all the things I do. I'm a weird cat, man.
I'm sure your wife would be happy to accomplish that slapping around thing.
Yeah, she does. Yeah. She's tough, man. Oh my goodness. There is no doubt if someone asked me, could your wife kick your butt? I would clearly say yes. She is that strong. It's not like I'm a wimp, but she is got some kind of genetic, I don't know, but she is damn strong, man. You can't, her muscle, I don't know what it is, inhuman. She doesn't look crazy, but she's really, really strong. Fast reflexes. We try to spar every now and then, just for fun, She's fast. Anyway. Okay, So yeah, our three fibers, the tough one, collagen, elastin for stretching, reticular is branching, that forms a network in our lymph organs. We'll see that probably more so in AMP2. So here we go, our first tissue, areolar, or areolar, however you want to say it. It has several names. This is one of the names, areolar connective. Another name is connective tissue proper. Another name is loose areolar connective. So it has three different names, just, or you could just call it loose areolar. What can you say? It is the very generalized tissue that's around the entire body, found between organs. So, and it's one of the easiest to identify because it is so generalized. Here we go. Notice we have cells, right? Sparsely located, that's what I was saying before. These are our fibroblasts, these cells. What did we say connective tissue was? Cells living in a matrix with fibers, right? The matrix is the background fluid we see. What you're really seeing is the white light coming from the microscope through, but that lets you know that there's a matrix there because it's just water. And you see the fibers. The thick bands of pink here would be the collagen. The smaller black ones would be the elastic fibers, right? And they're still all proteins. Either way, this is loose areolar. This is your generalized connective tissue found between all the organs. It packages the organs, right? Surrounds capillaries. It's found in all kinds of nooks and crannies, really. It's also found in the dermis along with the dense irregular that we'll see. So many times it's really a better way to say is where is loose areolar not? It can find its way almost everywhere. It's kind of mixed in quite a bit. If you look at a steak and you see all that marbling on a steak, or the underneath of like some chicken skin, you pull the skin off underneath it, that's all loose areolar. All the stuff that covers organs is loose areolar. Adipose has an extra function besides being protective and supportive. It is known to give energy, right? Its tissue is unlike any other. We do have some matrix, right? But in a lot of slides for adipose, all you see is just fat cells, don't you? Like the one in lab, I think, was just a bunch of white cells like this. What are they carrying? These white cells. Fat. So does fat and water mix? So these cells, water is usually an intracellular fluid, isn't it? But these cells have fat. So fat and water can't exist in the same compartment, really. So the more fat cells you have overall, like if you have an increased level of fat in your body, overall that means the less water you can hold as a person. So you tend to be more prone to dehydration just from having more fat cells because they can't hold water. The water is between the fat cells, so in a sense you could hold water like that by bloat. But who wants bloat? Bloat is not useful water. Useful water is water inside the cell. And fat cells just don't have that. But we still need fat for energy, of course, no doubt, and insulation. You can see the nuclei kind of pushed to the outside of the cell here. They call that a signet ring appearance. Anybody know what a signet ring is? In the old days, guys used to give promise rings to a girl. Who'd be into that these days? Would it mean anything for a guy to promise his loyalty? Not much. That's terrible, isn't it? Why do guys have to be such jerks? I don't know. Why do women have to be so confusing? I better not say that. Actually, women are very simple. They want respect, absolute unconditional love, and great hugs, and the ability to say, I'm sorry whenever. Right?
And know why you're sorry.
And know exactly why you're sorry. And to really mean it. Not just to say it, right? That's hard to do for some guys. It really is. That's the challenge. Because sometimes we just are mad and we don't want to be sorry. That doesn't usually help anything, though. It's best to just say, honey, I'm an ass and I'm sorry. That usually works. Anyway. Okay. Reticular tissue, many reticular fibers. This is the one out of all the connective tissues that you probably need to know the least about. I would just kind of save this one for AMP2 to know that it's found in your bone marrow and lymph organs. But reticular we don't even have in lab. I don't think we even covered that in lab. So it is part of the loose category. Loose category is areolar, adipose, and reticular. Right? So this is the last of the loose category. Loose means we see fibers and cells loosely arranged. That's what that means, right? So that's all. For dense, dense compared to loose, right? See my point? What do we notice in the dense picture? You don't see much matrix, do you? It's there, but it's just more fibers than anything else. It's very dense. Loose means you're going to see some matrix in there, loosely arranged among cells. Dense means it's very packed with fibers. So in this case, it's dense regular, which means a regular uniform orientation of the fibers, a very predictable orientation. And this is our tendons and ligaments. This is what we would expect to see in an MRI, right? It's a nice, good, even arrangement. Or if you had a rip in this tissue of a tendon or ligament, it wouldn't look so even. You'd see scar tissue easily in this. It'd be very noticeable that it's not uniform. If you look at a non-uniform dense tissue, this would be it. So this, if you notice, dense irregular is like taking dense regular and kind of swirling it up, right? Mixing it all up. That's why it's called dense irregular. It's dense, but it's what? Irregular, non-uniform alignment of the fibers, which has a purpose. The regular alignment means that if you take fibers like this, a regular alignment means that it's tough. It can take some tensile strength to it, right? Irregular arrangement is useful in what way? It can withstand torsion, right? This cannot withstand torsion. It breaks apart. But dense irregular can withstand torsion. So that's why we put dense regular for tendons and ligaments for more of a one plane motion, where dense irregular is useful where there's lots of different kinds of motion and different kinds of stresses, I should say. So again, dense regular is found in tendons and ligaments, and dense irregular is found, of course, in the dermis, also in the submucosa, if you want to write that down, but organ capsules is a big one for dense irregular. It surrounds these the joint capsule here. So it's just a tougher, it really is a tougher type of connective tissue. And this is the one that is not really given that much attention in the book. I wish it did. But this is the one that's usually found. All the examples when I showed you where connective was underneath epithelium, like in the bladder and the skin and the intestines, all that kind of stuff, all that connective tissue was dense irregular. Right? Okay. And a lot of times dense irregular is going to be mixed in with loose areolar. And there could be even some fat somewhere. Right? So fat can go anywhere, really. So they do tend to mix. But what do you clearly see? If we go back in time to the beginning of the class, could this ever possibly be epithelium? No. You see the stark difference now? Epithelium is all cells. Right? Plus, there's no uniform alignment here. There's no stacks. There's no single layers. Right? There's no column-shaped cells. We see fibers swirled up all together, so we know it's automatically connected. And even muscle will look different than this, because some people could argue, well, that looks like muscle. Muscle has more order to it, a predictable order than this would. All right, so getting into the cartilage. So if you've got a strategy going for connective, this is actually my strategy, but I'm hopefully, encouraging you to use it. You got your 3 loose, because we got 10 to learn. If you take the strategy, and it's right on that handout I showed you earlier, you got 3 loose, 2 dense. So how many is that? That's already half of what we need to know, and that's not that bad, right? Having a strategy like that. Now we're going to have 3 cartilages. So how many we have left? 2. Bone and blood, which are very, very, very easy to see. Okay? So having a strategy makes it more, workable in your head. The 3 cartilages are pretty much, they're pretty unique themselves. Hyaline is clearly the most abundant, found all over the body, right around the ends of bones. So that where it says articular cartilage, this is clearly the end of the bone. Whether it be the end of the rib, the end of the humerus, the end of the ulna, the end of the finger bones, it doesn't matter. Every end of the bone is called, or is lined with, I should say, articular cartilage. Articular means joint, so it's joint cartilage. When people say that Arthur came to town, or they have arthritis, this is what they're talking about. Hyaline cartilage has thinned. They've lost the cartilage somehow, either through injury or just non-use. They're just getting old or something. It got thin. That's what we're talking about. Hyaline cartilage is the cause of, or the loss of hyaline cartilage, I should say, is the cause of osteoarthritis. So we'll see that in the bone chapter. But this is our regular articular cartilage is what it's called, generally speaking. Also found in the trachea. It's the most abundant. Here's the cells. What are they called? It's cartilage now, right? Chondrocyte. Cells living in a matrix, right? The matrix is a very thick protein, dense water matrix. So hyaline cartilage is pretty unique in that it's a very smooth looking, kind of relaxing looking cartilage, if you want to put it that way. It's like looking at art. You would have a different, of course, description than me. But either way, it's pretty easily noticeable. Compared to elastic, look at that. Very stressful, right? Intense looking. All this intense, these fibers that you see are the elastic fibers that have been stained to stick out. So that's a big difference from that, isn't it? So hyaline cartilage, is this simple squamous? No. Is it fat? Nope. Is it loose areolar? Once you see these enough, you can work backwards and figure out what they're not. And sometimes that helps you figure out what it is. So the elastic fibers give that one away. Big apparent cells, however, give cartilage away in general. Our last cartilage is fibro, found all throughout the discs in the knee, the discs in the spine, even the little disc in the jaw. That gives some people trouble if they clench their teeth at night. It is our strongest cartilage, which means it has a very, 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 very dense matrix, even denser than hyaline. That gives it its strength. Again, sparse cells all located through the matrix. Could this ever be stratified squamous or simple columnar or transitional? Right? That's how you know you got it, if you can realize the big differences here. It's not bone, it's not blood, it's not fat. Right? So know all these categories and you can tend to work through it very easily. Real quick on bone. Where is bone found? In the bones. There you go. It looks like the rim of a tree. Can't miss that. No other tissue looks like it. Blood contains red cells. White cells are the bigger ones. Platelets are the little fragments. The matrix is what? Plasma, water. Again, blood looks like no other tissue. Easy to notice. And there's your review. Know that slide really well and you should be fine. All right, guys. So good luck on your lab today if you've got it. We'll finish this off Thursday and then start chapter 5, of course. Your test is a week from today.